Well, I have 11 here in Chicago. We are thrilled to welcome you to our information session for the Leadership and Society Initiative, where your next chapter matters. We have an exciting agenda ahead for the next hour. We will have a welcome from the two people who are joining me in this endeavor today, who both direct, in one case, the LSI, and are a fellow of LSI. We're then going to have a snapshot of the initiative, and we'll come back and have a conversation in deeper detail with Diana and Janet about their learning journey. Then we'll go through the timeline and details, and we will end with hopefully at least 15 minutes for your questions. So let me start by saying my name is Seth Green. I'm the Dean of the Graham School here at the University of Chicago. This is a university-wide endeavor, and we are very fortunate to have the deep collaboration of the other schools and divisions. But because we are the home for lifelong learning, we have the utter joy of having Diana Petty and her team that lead LSI on our bigger team at the Graham School, and to collaborate with all of the other units in putting this together. And I'll just say by way of background, my own background is I was a McKinsey consultant. I then was a social entrepreneur. I came into higher education to lead a Center for Social Enterprise. And when I landed at the Graham School, one of my great passions as we looked at how individuals were embracing midlife and beyond was to think about how we translate the immense amount happening by business leaders and others who wanted to have this next chapter of purpose, thinking about how we could build a curriculum and support to really guide that kind of endeavor. And LSI is now what is allowing us to do just that. With that, I want to invite Janet Foudy, who is a current LSI Fellow and the former chair of Deloitte and former CEO of Deloitte Consulting. Janet, would you just share a little bit about your background and how you joined us at LSI? What brought you into our orbit? And then we'll have Diana do the same.
Excellent. Seth, thank you so much for the gracious welcome, and great to see you all here today. I was spending a minute trying to figure out why I was first on the slide, and then I figured out it was alphabetical order. So I'm the real life case study here example, and but Diana and Seth are the real experts in this conversation. But I'm your case study today. So as Seth said, came out of Deloitte Consulting, where I spent my entire career. I started there right out of school in my early 20s, intending to do 2 years and figure out a grown-up job. And 33 years later, I had the incredible privilege to finish, having been elected by my partners to chair the firm. When I finished that role, it was clear that I needed to move on to the next thing. For any of you who worked in and around private partnerships, they're incredible, but they also, when you're done, you're kind of done. And so I left having never thought about, frankly, since my early 20s, what my life would look like, because opportunity sort of unfolded for me within the same firm, sort of unusual in this day and age. And so as I was sort of wandering around the woods, trying to figure out what was next, and finding that most of the things that came my way were very similar to the things I had already done at Deloitte, there were two things happened. One is I was like, I didn't leave Deloitte to do more of the same things. And the second is I really wanted purpose to be at the center of my work in this next phase of my life and career. So through some twists and turns, I found my way to the LSI program at University of Chicago. And I'm just finishing my year of fellowship. We'll talk about that, I'm sure, more through the conversation today, but it's been an extraordinary year to help me sort of recenter, refocus, think about myself, think about the role I can play, and having the kind of impact I want to have in this next chapter. So that's my very quick story. On a personal note, I am based here in Chicago. I'm in my home office today before I head downtown following this conversation. Though I spent most of my life up until this year in seat 2A on United Airlines. So it's also great to be in one place for a year. Seth, back to you.
We are thrilled to have you in this place this year, Janet. And Diana Petty is our phenomenal executive director of LSI, who is the reason that this vision that we had several years ago has come to life so brilliantly and beautifully. And so, Diana, can you share a little bit about your background and what brought you into leading LSI.
Absolutely. First of all, thank you, Seth, and thank you, Janet, and thank you to all of you. It is so wonderful to be in Zoom community together. Yes, happy to share a little bit of my journey of what brought me here. I have been at the University of Chicago for 7 years in a couple of different roles, but actually the lion's share of my career and kind of the first decade, I spent in and around city government in New York. So I worked in the Bloomberg administration doing civic tech initiatives and public-private partnership building, and then a stint of kind of mission-driven consulting with human service providers after that. And while I was in New York, I was really fortunate to get involved in several leadership development programs aimed at the social sector or civic sector. And one in particular was out of the NYU Wagner School of Public Policy and aimed at helping professionals who were kind of in the social sector, broadly defined, deepen their skill building, their network, their kind of understanding of their superpowers so that they could enhance impact in communities that they were already serving. And so I got really excited about the role that higher ed can play in activating extraordinary leaders for some of the most pressing social, economic, and environmental needs of our time. And so when this opportunity came to get to work with leaders who arguably are at the peak of their wisdom, and as you hear in Janet's story, thinking with real precision and intention about how they align, the expertise that they've built, what animates and energizes them, and where there are opportunities to help move the needle on issues they care about, I jumped at it, and I pinch myself every day that I get to be a part of working with the incredible individuals that come through LSI. So looking forward to the conversation and getting to share a little bit more with all of you.
Well, that is an introduction, but we're going to be coming back to Diana and Janet throughout this conversation. So at the end of each section, we'll be asking them to kind of bring us deeper. And so let me start with the snapshot of LSI. This is a fellowship for distinguished leaders who want to pursue really meaningful next chapters for themselves, meaning they have an inner journey. They want to think about their purpose, and for society. The aim is to use the extraordinary intellectual tools of this university to help people who want to help others and who want to use these talents that have been accumulated to better the world around them. There is a two-part rationale behind this initiative, and if you're on this call, you probably know the first one, which is people are living longer. And in particular, when you look at individuals who fit into the demographic that we're serving with this initiative, who have had this type of accomplishment, we are seeing if you reach 60, it is very reliable in the sense of above 70% that you may then reach 90. What that means is that many people, because careers are typically, in terms of that long-standing primary career, ending at the same point because our economy remains very dynamic and moving, is that now people are often finishing that original long-standing career arc at a place where they have an entire another chapter of adulthood still left. So part one, there's another chapter of adulthood that is out there as a potential. Part two is that many of the biggest issues that we're facing as a society, think climate change, think about technology and its both positive and potential adverse impacts in our society, think about how we manage capitalism in a way that is productive and inclusive. Many of these issues really require experienced leadership because it is individuals who understand systems and who can marshal resources that may be able to have the types of impact on them that are so valuable, and that many of our scholars here who are coming up with ideas to try to address this could really benefit from being in partnership with. And so the idea of LSI, very simply, is that we want to help those individuals who have had this accomplishment to have journeys that are really meaningful for themselves and that impact a really important issue that matters to them in society. And so those are the twin goals to help individuals and help society through the activation of this untapped talent pool of experienced leaders who are often not being put into the types of opportunities that allow us to fully harness their incredible capabilities. And so the way that we describe LSI in short is that this is a program that helps you to find your why, to really reflect on what you value and what you want to accomplish with this next chapter, to discern your what, to look at the issues that might motivate you specifically and understand those issues deeply, and then to activate that how, to be in a place where you know your roadmap for being able to move the needle with your talents on those issues that both personally motivate you and that express a real impact for society. And I'll come back now to Janet and Diana to talk about how you're seeing this actually play out. And Janet, let me start with you because you are a month away from presenting your purpose plan to the world. That is the capstone of your experience. And I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about where that purpose plan currently stands and how LSI has helped you to uncover what that purpose plan would look like. And I'm going to take down my screen just so we can see both of you in full size here.
Excellent. Well, that, as you know, can be a long conversation, so I'll try to do the short version of this, Seth. So for me, coming into LSI, I had a handful of hypotheses on where I wanted to spend my time. I had sort of three broad strokes of things that I thought might be of high interest to me, and I pretty quickly filtered to two of them as my focus area. I would say my big learnings have been, and I'll get to what those are. I was not trying to do a major drum roll here. For me, I spent, you'll hear from Diana, and you'll probably see a slide along the way, that the LSI program is designed in sort of three big threads or chunks over the course of the year. For me, the process was much more iterative, and I almost went through, know myself, know the world, and know my plan sort of over and over and over again. Maybe I should have presented after Diana today. For me, I learned and focused a lot on what my priorities were for this next chapter, both through conversations with my fellows and what mattered to them, as well as for me, a studying of the classics, which, I have a business and math sort of pedigree from an academic perspective, back from when I was in, college and business school in the 80s and early 90s. So for me, discussion with my fellows who come from a wide variety of backgrounds, from architects to a rabbi, to lawyers, to other business people, to academics, and the study of the classics actually helped me really focus on what was important and what mattered to me personally. In terms of topic areas, I sort of came to a place where I decided that I wanted to do something that both built on the things I had done, which I'll talk about in a moment, but really served a much broader swath of society than the work I had done to date. And then I've learned a ton about one of our courses is very focused on sort of the practical, this is how I describe it, the practical application of how to bring your ideas to life in various business models for enacting social change. And that is something I knew almost nothing about. And I've learned a lot about the role of venture and equity and philanthropy and sort of all sorts of different dimensions and domains of how to impact change. So each of those sort of components has helped me shape and really form my ideas. Where I am is a plan that has sort of three big threads to it. I'm going to continue my work in women's leadership, sort of helping think about women from sort of business school to the boardroom, in helping accelerate women in their careers and in their advancement. The second place I'm continuing to spend time is in and around technology, which I'm a technologist by background, and spending time in and around how you think about technology for broad impact. And both of those I would call sort of secondary threads of my work. My primary area of focus is in around women's health. And when I really thought about a broad platform for how to have really substantive impact across society, very, very broadly, that's the place I've chosen to spend my time, both to help women, 51% of our population today, and of course, each one of us obviously has mothers for sure, children, spouses, women that are important to them in their lives. And I believe that women's health has been underinvested in writ large. And so that's the place I'm spending the dominant portion of my time, in and around a set of business models that have become much more clear to me in the time we've spent together. So that is my attempt to encapsulate a lot of learning into a few minutes, but that is, Seth, sort of the journey that I've been on and where I'm continuing to focus my time and energy as I move forward.
Well, and we're so grateful that you are, and it's such a great example because I know over the course of your time here, you've really been able to zero in on where you see the specific gaps. So I know we've talked about this, Janet, but I'll just bring it to the group because I think it's so interesting that women are living longer. Health span, though, is actually shorter, so there's a longer period of time as a result where there's lifespan without health span, and figuring out how to address that. And I know you've been, looking at incredible researchers here like Emily Rogalski, who looks at super aging and all sorts of other models. And so it's just a great example of the rigor that you've been able to bring in partnership with faculty here to look at these issues.
Yeah, it's hard to encapsulate all that rigor in my own priorities, which that's a whole nother conversation. My key themes is I want to work hard. I'm comfortable being out and about, but I do not want to be on red eyes. To the learning I've had about women's health and why that matters to all of us, to Seth's point, as well as the business models to actually affect that change. So that would be the bumper sticker summary of all that.
Well, and Diana, you get to see all of our fellows. And so we had 20 in our first cohort. We have 22 this year. Can you talk about how people have approached their purpose plans overall and just give us a sense of the spectrum of different possibilities?
Definitely. So I want to preface this by giving a little bit of context on what we sort of have come to see that unifies LSI Fellows. And there's kind of three qualities that have really come to the fore. And the first is that, fellows are at some kind of inflection point. That inflection point looks very different across the board. There's no kind of archetype for that, but that they're meaningfully considering some kind of reactivation of purpose and making some shifts in their lives accordingly. The second is that they really have a fire in their belly about the state of the world and are wanting to find the right pathways to contribute, to offer, their wisdom and their abilities in service of society. And then the final quality is that they possess a sort of intellectual curiosity, right? And want to come into a rigorous and robust learning community, work alongside purpose-driven peers, and tap into the assets of the university to really kind of expand their ways of thinking and the development of their kind of confidence and clarity as they step forward. But beyond those three measures, they are, and Janet alluded to this, they are distinct and different in almost every other dimension that we could think of, both in terms of the experience and kind of career backgrounds that they bring into the fellowship, but also how they're thinking about the vision for what comes next. And so it's not surprising then that if you have 20 or 22 different fellows, you have 20 or 22 very unique and very individualized purpose plans. And I think, a bedrock value of the University of Chicago, and LSI is designed in this mold, is that here we teach people how to think, not what to think. And so though the program does have an impact orientation, and we really are, what we've developed in terms of curriculum is aimed at helping leaders activate and kind of build this advanced leadership force for society, we are not prescriptive about what impact means. And it could be at the systems level, or it could be neighborhood-based or in their local communities and circles that they already occupy. And we see both as equally necessary and valuable. And so the continuum of purpose plans that we've seen in both cohorts so far are bookended by kind of what we refer to as an outside in or an inside out approach. And what we mean by that is some fellows, Janet, I think, is an extraordinary example of this, came in with a domain area that they were concerned about, that was really animating and kind of calling to them to step into in some capacity. And for any topic under the sun, you name it, there are fellows thinking about it. Obviously, Janet's thinking about women's health, but we also have folks working on violence prevention, reforming how we teach literacy in public schools, workforce development issues, food insecurity issues. It really runs a very wide gamut. And, so for those fellows, they've left and their purpose plans are really homing in again with kind of clarity, with focus, with real precision on where they can step into that area and kind of bring something meaningful to moving the needle, and a sensation that if they're able to even contribute in the slightest way and kind of activate opportunities for purposeful change on that issue area, they will derive a sense of enrichment and fulfillment at this stage of their lives. On the other end of the spectrum, we had fellows really kind of home in on a sense of aspirational self in this moment of their lives, kind of hanging out on this learning pillar of knowing oneself and deep reflection and really understanding where they want to grow, continue to evolve, how they want to invest in their relationships. And we found that those purpose plans aligned a little bit more with, okay, if I can bring out my wisdom in kind of new ways that maybe I haven't tried out before, that, and also kind of invest in my own growth and my own expansiveness at this moment of life, that will position me to be the most impactful leader that I could be. And so those fellows are thinking more about teaching, about writing and thought leadership, about mentorship, and really kind of bringing up the next generation of emergent leaders and talent. And then there's everything in between, right? Those are just two kind of the poles as we've seen it. And so it has been really extraordinary to watch a liberal arts style curriculum and a very multidimensional learning journey allow fellows to discern something that is very unique to them, their values, their expertise, and where they want this next chapter to take them. So that's been a gift.
If I could just jump back in, Seth, I would say the cohort, probably give or take, I think about as sort of a third, a third, a third. It's probably not going to be exactly that way, but a third who want to go start something because whether that is a for-profit or not for profit. And to be clear, there's a lot happening in impact in for-profit as well as not for profit, who haven't found what they're looking for and will likely start something. A third of us who are using existing constructs for the change that we want to see in the world. And then a third who it's much more personal and they are teaching, writing, coaching. So it's been a really good, Diana and I both talked about, everything from a leading academic cardiologist to, an architect who's focused on climate change to business people, but really using very different mechanisms to think about the change that they want to build their life around in terms of the sort of the outcomes as well. So thanks for letting me jump back in with that, because I think that's a really important part of the conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Janet, and thank you, Diana. And I think that gives you a sense of where this journey heads. And so now what we want to do is we want to walk you through the learning journey that brings you to the capstone that Diana and Janet were just describing. So as you heard, there are 3 learning pillars in LSI. The first is knowing oneself, which is really about looking at how people across time and space have answered the question of why am I here and what's my purpose. We are very fortunate to have people like David Brooks who teach in this curriculum and who are helping you to really think about that inner journey. And we start there because we find that for so many, after decades of accomplishment, they remain very passionate, but because they have been responding to a lot of extrinsic accountability, they may not be quite as closely in touch with what may motivate them intrinsically in this moment. And we find that humanistic inquiry, as well as having 20 others who are on this journey with you and ready to be vulnerable and ready to be open about their own thinking, is the greatest way for you to have that space to really reconnect with that core motivation that may guide you in this next mountain or chapter of life. The second piece is understanding the world. There's actually a great quote from David that where you can find a vocation, and he's quoting a theologian in this case, is where your deep gladness meets the world's great hunger. And so what we want to do is pair what may be in you with what may be out there in the world. And what's very unique about this, because we know the people coming into this are already very deeply connected and curious about the world, is that our main approach analytically is to give you different lenses to evaluate issues rather than to just tell you what we think about issues, which we know you can do on your own. And so what that looks like is you get different disciplinary ways of investigating the world. And we do this because we want to make you more ready for this transition. So for example, you'll have an economist, you'll have a sociologist, you'll have someone from a policy lens, and they'll show you how do you think like a sociologist or an economist. And they will disagree vehemently. And that's something that we love at the University of Chicago, is when people disagree about solutions. And so an economist will, for example, from our crime lab, look and say, the way that, according to the data, we get to lower crime is greater prosecution, for example. And we'll have a sociologist who will look at this qualitatively and has written a MacArthur-winning book on this topic and was named a MacArthur Genius. And he'll look at how this approach to prosecution can create a vicious cycle. And so they will disagree vehemently on that. And what we'll give you is not an answer. We'll give you a framework for looking at these issues. And the reason this is so valuable, we believe, at this stage of life is that many people, essentially over 3 or 4 decades, have been trained in a certain way of looking at the world. And what we find is that it's rare that someone comes out of LSI saying, I no longer look at the world with the same lens anymore. You know, I came in a business person, but now I think of everything as a sociologist. That doesn't happen. What happens is that they may still kind of key into their way of looking at it, but when they're in a conversation with others trying to, let's say, move forward the issue of violence prevention, they now will really understand how the other person, maybe coming from a civic background and thinking more like a sociologist, or another person from a policy lens, they'll begin to say, oh, that's how this person may look at it. And so instead of maybe coming with a lane of, okay, I had this background and it doesn't make any sense to me that you would solve it this way, you begin to realize, okay, so here's how I would solve it. Here's how I believe we could be successful, but here's why this person may be coming from another perspective. So understanding the world is really about giving you that fluency to see lots of different lenses on issues that may matter, and hopefully expanding your horizons so that you might be able to collaborate with people from different backgrounds at this stage of life toward issues that you may care about. The final area is envision the future, and this is what you consider to be the very practical connection point between the two. So I know my values, I understand these issues in the world. Well, what's realistic about how I can actually move this forward? And here we bring in faculty from outside the university who have led in different ways and can teach about it. So we have people from executive search firms about how do you think about getting on a corporate or nonprofit board at this stage. We have coaches who are helping you to write that board biography. We have people that are involved in all the areas that Janet described: impact investing, strategic philanthropy, how to serve in community in a meaningful and deep way. And then how do you engage, as Janet mentioned, in purpose from a for-profit perspective? Because we find that our fellows want to go out in every direction to try to have impact in their next chapter. And so you get a very academic lens in the first two and a very practical lens in the final, so that you can combine those into both an intellectually rich and practically applied next chapter. Alongside the academic curriculum, we're very pleased to have different coaches. An executive coach who really helps you to think about you and what matters at this stage and how you get there strategically. A mentor on the other side who has actually been through this. They are people that are about 5 to 10 years into that next chapter, and they have the lived experience to advise you, and we pair people based on what their specific interest is and what the mentor has been able to accomplish in that next chapter. And then an academic advisor who helps you deeply investigate the societal issue that you want to better understand, so that you can really narrow in on where you might make a contribution. Alongside this, you are going on this journey with others. And I think the greatest value, even though we're so proud of our faculty, is that you get to be in this journey with 20 other individuals who are at a similar point in life. They've had a great accomplishment, but what they really want to do is look forward now and think about how they travel lightly and intentionally into this next chapter. And so with that, I'll just say that we believe this is not just an individual journey, and we really want for people that have a partner that they want to kind of have on this journey with them, to be able to accompany them at multiple points in this journey, so that you are able to make sure that you are on the same page as you move forward. And so we're very fortunate to have partners who are able to accompany fellows on our international travel and on a number of other major moments in this fellowship. But with that, let me take down my screen because I want to come back to Janet and Diana. And Janet, let me start with you. One aspect that is a little bit intimidating about this experience, you are called a fellow. That is because you bring knowledge here to the university and you bring immense partnership opportunity. But in moments of this experience, you are very much a student. And you are, even in your case, in the design pathway, which we'll talk about in a moment, you are a student when you audit classes here outside of the core curriculum with undergrads or grad students. Can you talk a little bit about what it is like to be back in the classroom after what you described was, 3 decades, and maybe talk a little bit about your experience with the cohort-based and audited classes?
Yeah, so, Seth, just to pull the thread on the cohort, sort of the chatter from previous classes and people from other programs like this around the country, emphasize the value of the cohort from a learning perspective, which I just could not, I was a little, maybe not skeptical that they wouldn't be great people, but that it would be such a source of both friendship and learning. And I just couldn't underscore that enough, Seth. So I wanted to sort of put a finer point there. The classroom experience is really interesting. And I would say it's been very mixed for me. There are classes where I feel like I'm truly back in, I don't even know if I could say college from a comfort zone perspective, maybe even before that. I was not a strong science student. It was almost like being back in physics class where I'm like, okay, what language are we even using? Now I've got a lot more confidence now, but the time to prepare for those courses, and there is a lot of reading in a very good way, to prepare for those classes, to come in with a level of both confidence and humility was just a very different experience than anything I'd had in decades. And I'm alongside both people who went to University of Chicago and Harvard in particular. I'm a state school girl, but University of Chicago and Harvard in particular that had a really well-rounded liberal arts education. So we get into the courses where you're reading the classics, and for me, that was both humbling and fabulous to get to have people talk about beginner's mindset, and I've always felt like I was someone who had a beginner's mindset, especially as a consultant. That's sort of part of our DNA, and this was truly a beginner's mindset. And then there are courses that are in and around leadership, in and around sort of business-centric content, where I felt I was still in learning mode, but I had a lot more to contribute than just being a sponge. So I've had both of those sort of ends of the spectrum experiences. And, like all things, how much you prepare makes a huge difference in how much you get out of it. In terms of auditing courses with both graduate students and undergraduates, that has been really fabulous and really fun. The first sort of day I walked in, you raise the average age of the class in a substantive manner and can be a little bit unnerving. The professors, and so I go talk to the professor and explain who I am and why I'm there, and say, my goal is to sort of sit quietly and just learn as much, quietly as I can. And the professors, to a T, whether that's in Booth in the business school, so I took a class in the medical school. I've taken a couple of classes in sort of the sort of hardcore liberal arts, have been so open to me contributing, through the lens that I bring, which is obviously different than an 18-year-old or a 25-year-old, have been terrific. I will say I came in for the core curriculum. There's a pretty heavy amount of reading, and that is something that I do pretty religiously. I came into the audit classes saying, I'm going to write every paper and I'm going to do every ounce of work. That is not the expectation, and I pretty quickly threw that out the window because, most of us still have lots of other things happening in our lives, personally and professionally, than a 21-year-old student does. I had no interest in being in the library until 2 a.m. So I do the reading so I can keep up with the conversation, but I've yet to take an exam or write a paper in one of my audited classes, and I've still gotten a ton out of it and so much fun being with a much broader set of people than I might have had the opportunity to interact with in my day job. I always love spending time at Deloitte with the 20-somethings as they start their career, but it's very different when you're along with someone as a student versus being an executive. As approachable as you want to be as an executive, it's very different sitting side by side with someone in learning mode. So those are a few of my reflections on sort of that part of the journey, Seth.
That is incredible. And Diana, I just want to come to you because you get to see across all of these elements. And are there any that you want to call out when you think about the learning journey that are particularly significant?
Sure. So I think in observing two cohorts go through this, we feel this learning container that Seth walked you through, self, society, future, that as like a sandbox in which to play is really effective, right? Because as Janet mentioned, some fellows will kind of go through those 3 cycles many, many times throughout their fellowship year, and others will kind of sit and move a little bit more slowly, but certainly it's not perfectly linear, but that it creates a meaningful discernment process that I think has left each fellow different than how they entered the experience. But we've found that within that bigger container, there's a couple sweet spots that we've really been trying to optimize. And the first is this balance between a collective cohort-based journey and opportunity for individualization and customization. So, right, Janet is describing spending a lot of class hours with her cohort, and that is, right, that is where they're doing the widening of the aperture. They're going through lots of different perspectives and frameworks and pathways to impact, and being able to really learn from how each other is kind of grappling with these big questions. Janet said it beautifully, that we have seen that be a meaningful accelerant to each individual's learning process. But then laid over that, there are these moments for customization where fellows can really gravitate towards areas of the university that are most aligned with their learning objectives and their goals and kind of their vision for what comes next. Having that blend of being able to kind of be grounded and anchored in a peer-based process while also being able to dial up what feels most exciting to you, we've seen be really powerful and effective. And the other area of balance that I think Janet and Seth also alluded to is between the philosophical and the practical, right? And so being able to allow our fellows to have a lot of space to take a step back and ask more questions and reframe those questions and realize that they may never really have an air quotes answer, but that is broadening their vision, it's broadening their sense of development, it's broadening the way that they kind of interrogate these issues critically. But then hearing from leading social sector practitioners and doing site visits and having experiential-based learning that helps them think more precisely about how they move from concept into reality. That having both of those components has activated, I think, their imaginations and also how they step forward with more confidence in really meaningful ways. And then, Janet mentioned it, but I can't resist that not only is the cohort this kind of powerful epicenter of meaningful trust and bonds and kind of deep relationships, but the kind of ripples of LSI community. And I've just been so struck by how much our faculty want to spend time with this group of leaders, not necessarily exclusively in class, because for our faculty members and kind of university leaders, they not only are so energized to learn from this type of group, it's very unique in our campus community, but I think they identify and want to kind of like learn by osmosis from the transitional moment that our fellows are going through. So we've had faculty members organize visits to plays with the cohort. We've had them, kind of invite them to special lectures and opportunities that, again, are outside of their role as instructor within LSI. And so it has, I think, we see, all of our fellows as really kind of early pioneers in what will define a new stage of life. And there's so many people who are in our orbit that really want to be a part of understanding what that might look like.
Well, so far we have been describing the pathway called the design pathway in this conversation, because Janet is in our second cohort of this fully immersive, you're here on campus for a full academic year fellowship. And what's happened over our first 2 years is this program has been so meaningful in the ways that Diana and Janet have described that many people have come to us and said, I really want to be on this journey, but I am still in my C-suite role, or I have this immense portfolio of responsibilities, or I have a geographic limitation from moving to Chicago, where I would still love to be able to participate and to learn on this type of curricular journey, but would need a different format to do so. And so I am thrilled to share that thanks to Diana's extraordinary leadership, we are, as of 2026, going to be in a position to support an additional pathway within the Leadership and Society Initiative for those individuals who are wanting to embrace this journey, but who are fully immersed in either their current work or a portfolio life, and who may want to begin planning for their next chapter, even when they are 3 to 5 years away from entering it, so that they can begin to have what you might consider to be an intentional off-ramp, on-ramp, rather than a cliff where you're finishing and then coming into this immersive journey. And so that is the motivation behind what you now see on your screen. And imagine pathways for those who want to explore possibilities while maintaining fully immersed work and life, and then a design pathway, which is the existing and now going into its third cohort model, and that is for people that want to be fully immersed here during an academic year context. And so with that, let me turn it over. Diana is the visionary behind the details, and I'll let her talk through them.
Great, thank you, Seth. So, just to kind of to start by talking a little bit about how we think of these two things. I mean, so both pathways, to be very clear, offered a very structured and also rigorous and robust process for helping our fellows understand their core values, their intrinsic motivations, and bringing those things into sharper focus and how they might align those to specific actions and efforts and decisions in their next chapter. And as Seth is describing, where they really different is that in the design pathway, right, you're getting to kind of surface a set of ideas, stress test those ideas, and kind of put it through your paces, and come away with a sense of the initial steps you are, going to take to get started in activating that vision. In contrast, the Imagine pathway is a little bit further upstream in that visioning process. And it's really where you begin to kind of shake the trees, test out different possibilities, and get that kind of early clarity on the direction you may go and what your possibility set is for deeper focus and investigation stepping forward. So what you see here on this slide, very brass tacks, is that the design pathway is one academic year, that's September through May, essentially on a full-time basis, but with flexibility built in to honor obligations outside the program. And the Imagine pathway is one calendar year, January through November, and it's 4 4-day retreats on campus, very similar in nature. Many of you are probably familiar with an executive ed format, kind of low residency where you're coming here, you're having space for a strategic pause here in Hyde Park in Chicago, but then having also support in between those 4-day retreats on a hybrid basis. So we'll go to our next slide. I also want to, in some ways, continue to emphasize the ways in which these two pathways are more similar, and that what differentiates them largely is the dosage of learning, engagement, and depth and exposure. So both pathways here move through those 3 learning pillars that we've been talking about. Both are cohort-based, where you're going through this journey alongside a group of peers. They include opportunities for both individualized coaching and support and kind of narrowing of your unique goals and priorities. And ultimately, each pathway also culminates in a capstone that brings into alignment your values, what you're passionate about, and opportunities for social, societal contribution at this moment. So the difference in dosing is largely around class time. Of course, in the design pathway, there are just many more course hours. And also the design pathway offers these kinds of what we refer to as wraparound supports, such as the Aspen Institute Executive Seminar, a travel study, and immersion days to look at specific kind of societal issues as illustrative examples for how we understand both root causes, but also promising interventions that can drive meaningful change. The other side of that same coin in the Imagine pathway is that for folks who already have full-time commitments, but they want to get started and would value this having of structure and kind of a bit of an accountability mechanism for beginning to imagine purposefulness and how they might kind of redefine and reorient their leadership at this moment of their lives. That's really where the Imagine pathway is structured to create that level of freedom while still having a backbone learning journey and support to think about what comes next. We can go to the next slide. The final area where that dosage is different is in those two capstones. And so we've been using a kind of geography analogy to describe these two learning outcomes for our fellows. And in the Imagine pathway, you're leaving with your next chapter compass, which helps guide you in your continued exploration and discovery of opportunities that align with your interests. Whereas in the design pathway, you leave with a roadmap. So you get that compass feel, you kind of have a sense of your principles that are helping you wayfind, but you've also identified specific opportunities and actions that you are going to take in the kind of near term and a lot of clarity directionally in the long term on where you see that ultimate impact that you're hoping to drive. So in your next chapter compass in the Imagine pathway, the main focus is really around intrinsic motivations and understanding what really energizes you and how do you for yourself define success in this next stage of your life, you know, kind of outside the typical extrinsic structures in which we're all very used to operating. And then we want fellows to use that kind of clarity of intrinsic motivation to develop decision criteria that will help them prioritize where they want to go deeper and where they want to focus their energy and efforts, and really are kind of leaving with this lay of the land of kind of where they might start to gravitate again through this process that Janet describes. They'll be exposed to a lot of different opportunities for both reflection, understanding the world, and really kind of brass tacks getting into areas of societal impact. And a big part of what we hope to accomplish in the Imagine pathway is a little bit of future sensing to inform future dreaming for our fellows. So one of the retreats will be focused around hearing from thought leaders on what the world might look like in the year 2100, and sort of understanding where is the puck moving and how can you start to see yourself stepping forward in that context. On the design pathway, sorry, just one last piece on this. The next chapter roadmap, you're kind of getting all of those elements, but you've also had a lot more space and time and depth to really investigate different opportunities that you might step into within the contours of the fellowship. And so you're leaving with that level of like precision, of focus, of really narrowing what's going to fit you as you step forward. And so last slide here on this before I go back. We also want to be abundantly clear that we have always seen LSI as more than just a year, and that in many ways, the post-fellowship community is equally important, if not potentially more important than the fellowship itself. So how that manifests for us, we refer to the post-fellowship community as the LSI Alliance. And this is for both pathways. You know, we will both Imagine and Design Fellows will become a part of this post-fellowship group of advanced leaders who are really stepping forward, thinking about societal contribution, thinking about enduring intellectual expansiveness and deepened connection and relationships at this stage. And so one thing that we're really excited about now having both of these pathways is that it will just continue to kind of deepen that community effect as a force multiplier, not only for what each individual fellow can accomplish on their own, but the way the kind of collective and group can move forward in deepening broader impact. So with that said, thank you again, and I'll turn it back to you.
Great, and I will move us quickly through the end here because we want to get to Q&A. And let me just start with who we're looking for. These are individuals who have at least 2 decades of senior leadership experience, a track record of significant accomplishment, a willingness to engage in deep, rigorous, and respectful open exchange. We are relentlessly committed here to free expression. We believe that it makes everyone better when they contend with views that may be different from their own, and we want fellows to come in ready to engage in that environment and to respectfully disagree with one another in the spirit of joint inquiry. We want you to have a commitment to society and a compelling vision for how your participation and really absorbing all of these resources here and giving your incredible talents will support a meaningful next chapter. We have a three-part application process. There is a very kind of easy to start with candidacy form where you're submitting your existing biography. The goal there is that we have a lot of interest and we want to tell you whether or not, based on your biography, you would be eligible. And that's because the second part of this application is significant. You're writing multiple essays, you're getting references, and what we want to tell you is, yes, it is worth your time to invest in writing that essay and getting those references because you are with the types of background that we believe could be a promising candidate. The final stage is an interview. That's because we really construct this cohort with incredible rigor and care. It has come back from the first two cohorts, so that is the number one value we offer you is one another. And so we take that with the utmost seriousness that we want to have people in the cohort who, one, want to contribute to each other's development, and two, are in a place in their learning journey that can be really mutually generative. And we find that interviews really allow us to dig into those types of questions. And let me just say that we do have a fee for the fellowship. It is consistent with the cost of a year of study here at the University of Chicago for full-time and then executive programs respectively. But the most important message I want to give on this slide is that we are very intentional about having assistance to make sure that this can be accessible to individuals who are selected and who meet the criteria. And so we look forward to having those conversations with you. And with that, I'm going to take down my screen. We have just 8 minutes with apologies for Q&A, but we are eager to answer your questions, if not here, individually. And in a follow-up email that you'll receive, you'll have time available to book your calendar with a member of our team, our associate director, as a next step. But let me just invite those who have questions now. We would love to hear them. You can use the Q&A. You can also raise your hand if you press on that React tab and use that to raise your hand, and we can come to you. The first question is in the chat. It's from Victoria. Please define 20 years of leadership experience. Here's the best part. You get to answer that question as well, meaning you get to tell us how your 20 years have leadership experience. So Janet mentioned we have a rabbi, we have architects, we have a cardiologist. Not all of them were in executive roles with large spans of control that meant that they were managing, thousands or tens of thousands of people as Janet was, but they had different ways in which they brought their leadership to the people around them in their fields. And so in their biographies or resumes, they often called out how they would qualify. We really do have an open mindset. And the aim of that requirement is that we are looking for individuals who we believe have a real relevance to the curriculum, which is a lot around how do you harness your leadership experience toward this next chapter. And so we just want to be sure that the curriculum that we have is really able to apply to you. But that said, I want to be clear, people have been able to qualify within that in many different respects. And we really admire people that may have teaching experience and served on a number of committees. And so we've really tried to be simultaneously having standards, but being very open-minded about how we apply them so that we can build the greatest cohort composition. I mean, Diana, Janet, anything to add to that before we jump into the next question?
The only thing I would add, Seth, is that that broad definition of leadership has made it really interesting. I mean, I had many cohorts in my first chapter of executives with similar pedigrees and sets of experiences who were terrific for navigating the things I was working on. I found this to be really interesting to have a cohort of leaders with such different definitions of leadership and ways in with which it played out.
So our next question here is about the Imagine pathway, and this person is saying they have 7 to 10 years in their current executive role. Is that within the realm for starting the Imagine pathway? And I will say absolutely. One of the big benefits we see with Imagine is that if you begin to discern those intrinsic motivations and begin potentially to see possibilities, you can use your current platform to begin directly building in that additional area that you might want, again, off-ramp, on-ramp. And not to embarrass Janet, but I mean, Janet, in my mind, you did this. You may not have considered it so, but you wrote a best-selling book on women's leadership. And that established you in that domain area even further. And now this is part of your next chapter portfolio. Now, in your case, you didn't need us to figure out that was a motivation and begin thinking that through, right? But to me, it's an example of if people can discern, for example, 7 to 10 years before they make that transition, right? Then that current platform can really be one that you are harnessing to begin building out this other area of excellence that might be in that next chapter. And so certainly one of the reasons we created LSI Imagine is because we didn't want, again, people to have to go off the cliff before they figured out what the next mountain would be. We wanted for those who wanted to begin this journey to do so while they're in their roles. And just one other thing on Imagine, the 4-day retreats that take place each quarter, they're intentionally Thursday starting at lunch through Sunday afternoon, because we know people are busy in their jobs. And so that means you're only missing 2 days, including travel, of the work week once a quarter. Janet, I think you may have been leaning in.
I was actually just reading the rest of the questions here. There's a lot going on, so no, so go right ahead.
Well, so how do we support meaningful cohort collaboration for the Imagine pathway, Dan? I don't know if you want to talk to that in your vision.
Yeah, and I'll try to weave in Linda's question about days on campus as well. So let's start there maybe. So for the Imagine Pathway Days on Campus, it's 4 4-day retreats in January, April, July, and November. In the design pathway, those fellows largely are in residency for the 9 months of the fellowship. So in both cohorts, about 40% hail from Chicagoland, and their primary residents are here. The 60% hail from all over the country, and we have a few international fellows who relocate here for that 9 months. We provide support for them, helping to connect them with housing, such that they can really make the most of their time as a community member of the University of Chicago. That said, we have had 2 commuters in the design pathway. We have a programming Monday through Wednesday each week and in the design pathway, and we intentionally leave Thursdays and Fridays somewhat flexible to allow for fellows to honor outside commitments. And so in both cohorts, we had one person who decided, you know what, I'm going to come in on Monday morning and I'm going to leave on Wednesday night or Thursday morning, and I'm going to go back to my home each week. And so there is some level of customization there. In terms of when you're not in the Imagine pathway, when you're not here on campus, how are you engaging? There are 2 things. One is that you will have self-directed sort of next chapter compass assignments in between that we will position fellows to work on, building momentum and developing their compass in between those retreats, and then kind of coming into the retreats and reporting on their learnings, their findings, how they're thinking. In addition to that, we will also have the same level of executive coaching in both pathways. And so how that will look in the Imagine pathway is you will meet with your coach, kind of on your schedule and virtually in between the campus retreats. And those coaches will also do some small group facilitation. So we very much want there to be meaningful engagement in between those kind of on-campus moments. And so that's how we're thinking of it, a blend of kind of coaching, some small group work, and then independently directed assignments for your next chapter compass.
We have a final question here about the rigor of the Imagine pathway. And I'll just say that it is the 4 4-day retreats. There will be significant reading in between, and we will have you working on assignments. The University of Chicago prides itself on being the place where fun comes to die. So we try to make sure there's deep rigor in everything we do, although we have a lot of fun in this case. But the reason I say that is what we're trying to do with Imagine is just make it possible for people to experience who can't move here and be fully immersed. It is still going to be a very meaningful time and mindset commitment to be part of the cohort. And so the thing that we have been relentless on is that the rigor remains. Now, I think it's fair to say it is not as deep and is not as comprehensive as design, but this is not, I mean, and you know these programs exist, in exec ed where you come for a few days, think and go away. This is a year-long commitment And even though you're here for these 4-day retreats, you are expected to do meaningful work reading and have those coaching sessions and meetings with your progress partners in between. And so we hope that you would feel like true cohort members the entire time, and then join the Alliance afterward for the lifelong commitment. We are out of time. We do want to communicate to you that we are a program that respects your time, but we also really respect customization and individualization. And so on that note, there will be a follow-up email. It will include this video. It will also give you a chance to book time with one of our colleagues who is the Associate Director of Candidate Engagement. And we hope you do so because we really love those individual conversations. Thank you all so much for being here with us. And most of all, Janet and Diana, thank you for being such extraordinary ambassadors for LSI, and Janet, for what you're doing for women's health with what you've learned here. Hope everyone has a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Be
all.
well.
Great to be with
Godspeed.
you.